The Siege of Aachen took place in late August 1614, when the Spanish Army of Flanders, led by Ambrogio Spinola, 1st Marquis of the Balbases, marched from Maastricht to Germany to support Wolfgang Wilhelm, Count Palatine of Neuburg, during the War of the Jülich Succession. Despite its status as a free imperial city, Aachen was under the protection of John Sigismund of Brandenburg, Neunburg's ally and then rival, in the battle for the United Duchies of Jülich Succession.Despite. In 1611, the Protestant population of Aachen revolted against the Catholic city council, and seized the power. When the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolf II, observing the Peace of Augsburg, ordered the previous state to be restored, the Protestants allied themselves with the Margraviate of Brandenburg. The unexpected arrival of a Spanish army at the gates of the city, however, caused the Protestants to lose courage and surrender Aachen to Spinola. A Catholic garrison was installed and a process of re-Catholicization began. Background: Aachen was a free imperial city of importance from the times of Charlemagne to the 16th century. It was the place of coronation of the King of the Germans until Maximilian II was crowned in Frankfurt in 1562. Since then, Aachen went into a slow decline. A mainly Catholic city at the time of the Peace of Augsburg, it became religiously divided in the 1560s through the immigration of Protestant refugees from the Netherlands as a consequence of the Spanish persecution during the Dutch Revolt. By the 1570s, Aachen's population numbered 12,000 Catholics and 8,000 Protestants. The city council and the emperor tried to exclude the Protestants from political participation in 1581, but thanks to the economic influence of many of the Protestant citizens, Catholics were forced to allow them to access to the city council, as jurisdiction over Aachen was claimed by the Duke of Jülich and the Bishop of Liege, both of them Catholics. The Catholic population appealed to the first, who complained to Emperor Rudolf II, claiming that his ecclesiastic rights over Aachen had been violated. In 1593, the Reichshofrat declared that the city council could not change the religious status of Aachen, and therefore the Calvinists had to be expelled from the council. When they tried to resist, Rudolf outlawed the city and gave the Archduke Albert, governor of the Spanish Netherlands, the task of enforcing his decision. The subsequent re-Catholicization of the city was conducted by the Archbishop of Cologne. In 1611, during the War of the Jülich Succession, the Elector of Brandenburg and the Duke of Palatine of Neuburg, claimants of the Jülich Eardom in opposition to the Catholic Leopold V, Archduke of Austria, organized Protestant religious services in the nearby villages of Stolberg and Weiden. In response, the City Council of Aachen imposed a fine on those inhabitants who attended these services. 5 citizens were detained for ignoring the town's decree and banished as they refused to pay the fine. This caused a riot against the council on the 5th of July. The Catholic councillors were expelled and many Catholic buildings were sacked. The rebels assaulted the church and the College of the Jesuits, smashed the altars and images, and held a mock mass dressed in priestly garments. 1 priest was injured and 8 others dragged to the city council. A new Protestant council was established and appealed for support to John Sigismund, Elector of Brandenburg, the new Duke of Cleves. Spanish intervention. Rudolf II ordered the princes of Brandenburg and Palatine of Neuburg to restore the previous religious and political situation of Aachen under the menace of a ban. The Protestants, however, ignored the command and seriously wounded an imperial commissary sent to implement the emperor's edict. In May 1612, elections were held and Calvinists took the control of the town council. In 1613, as disputes over the Jülich succession continued, one of the claimants, Wolfgang Wilhelm, Count Palatine of Neuburg, converted to Catholicism and gained the support of Spain and of the Catholic League of Germany. On 20 February 1614, Emperor Matthias II ordered the restoration of the Catholic rule in Aachen, allowing the Spanish Army of Flanders under Ambrogio Spinola to intervene. Fearing an attack, the town council requested some help to the Elector of Brandenburg, who sent several hundred soldiers under General Georg von Palitz to reinforce the local militia. The city gates were manned and partly walled up. The Spanish preparations to intervene in the succession dispute alarmed the Dutch stadtholder Maurice of Nassau, Prince of Orange, who supported John Sigismund of Brandenburg, and knew that the Spanish intervention would destabilize the course of succession. In the middle of June, William Louis, Count of Nassau-Dillenburg, warned Prince Maurice that the Spaniards already had 9,800 men ready for field service, and that they would soon be joined by a further of 13,200 men. With the imminent Spanish threat, Maurice strongly reinforced the garrison of Jülich with 7 infantry companies, and an additional force of 2,000 men, for a possible siege. The situation was tense for the two sides. Maurice, with additional troops from towns that were not under serious threat, expected to be able to raise an army of 20,000 men, composed of 136 infantry companies and 40 cavalry companies. Meanwhile, Ambrogio Spinola was ready to start the campaign. His first movement was upon Aachen. Before we think of the affairs of Julius, the vicinity of Aachen ought to engage us to make on that side the first efforts of our army to punish the heretics of that city, and to execute the imperial mandate discerned against them, of which the Archduke and the Elector of Cologne are bearers. Every one knows with what boldness and with what contempt for the imperial mandates the heretic citizens have not usurped the government of Aachen, which belonged formerly to the Catholics only. Thus an infinity of reasons oblige us to repress by force so unjust an usurpation. In August 1614, Spinola advanced to Maastricht and its surroundings, and established his camp with an army of 18,000 infantry, 2,500 cavalry and 11 artillery pieces. From Maastricht, Spinola's army entered in the Rhineland accompanied by Guido Bentivoglio, Pope's nuncio at Brussels, and 2 imperial commissaries. Luis de Velasco, general of the cavalry, opened the way with 600 cavalry, followed by 4 battalions of foot, 1 of Spaniards, 1 of Germans and Burgundians and 2 of Walloons. 600 other horses closed the march. To prevent Aachen from being relieved by the Dutch from Jülich, Spinola detached what remained of his cavalry to block the road between the two cities. 2 hours after its departure from Maastricht, the Spanish army appeared before Aachen. The city lacked of modern fortifications and was surrounded by a single medieval wall. The Spanish troops took the hills which commanded the city, within musket shot from the walls, and erected a battery to threaten the inhabitants and the 600-man Brandenburgian garrison. After several days of negotiations, and with little hope of reinforcements, the defenders surrendered the city to the Spanish army with great regret of Maurice, who could not be on time for relief. Aftermath. The 600 Brandenburg soldiers were allowed to leave Aachen with the flags and were replaced by 1,200 Catholic Germans under the Count of Emden. Although the soldiers of the Spanish army, after several years of inaction, activity following the beginning of the 12 years' truce with the Dutch Republic, expected to sack the city. Spinola forbade any looting and Spanish troops did not enter the town. The Catholic City Council was restored, and on the 10th of September it issued an edict which gave the Protestant preachers 3 days to abandon the town, and 6 weeks for the non-citizen Anabaptists and other foreigners to do the same. From then on, only Catholic schools and schoolmasters were tolerated. Books labeled as heretics were banned. Meat dishes were not allowed to be eaten in inns on the fast days, and a fitting homage was to be paid to the Holy Sacrament and relics when public processions were held. The people who took part in the 1611 rebellion were punished. In 1616, 2 ringleaders were executed. More than 100 citizens who participated in the disturbances were exiled, and others were forced to pay a fine. After the capture of Aachen, Spinola took several towns and castles in the lands disputed by the claimants to the Jülich heritage, including Neuss, Mulheim, and the important German fortress city of Basel, which was garrisoned by troops of Brandenburg. As a consequence, the Protestant position in the Rhineland was weakened despite Spinola decided not to lay siege to Jülich due to its strong defense and large garrison. Then, Maurice of Nassau marched on Ries with an estimated force of 18,000 men. Spinola subsequently established a position near Xanten, whereupon Spinola and Maurice started negotiations about a neutrality pact, leading to the Treaty of Xanten, which ended the War of the Jülich Succession and all hostilities between Wolfgang Wilhelm, Count Palatine of Neuburg, and John Sigismund, Elector of Brandenburg, till 1621. The territories of Jülichburg and Ravenstein went to Wolfgang Wilhelm of Neuburg, while Cleves Mark and Ravensburg went to John Sigismund. Spinola refused to give up the key fortress of Basel, and further negotiations were necessary, but in the end a shaky peace was maintained.